My name is Emily Blackstock. I teach in Homewood City Schools, teach elementary, and I actually work at all three schools, and I've been teaching for 11 years now. So I started getting involved with Kids 63 in 2018 when an administrator in my school system sent us an email and said, you guys teach fourth grade history, you teach Alabama history in fourth grade. This is a great organization that collects firsthand accounts of people who lived in Birmingham in 63, and most of them were young children about the age of your students. And so they said this would be a really great source of primary sources that you could use in the classroom. So I reached out and I said, we would love to have some speakers come. Virginia Jones actually taught at Shades Cahaba for a long time, and so she said absolutely. Janice Nixon agreed to come. They came and they spoke to all of our fourth graders, and it was so incredibly powerful. Kids in Birmingham reached out and said that they wanted teachers to do some units or some lessons. They wanted to start creating more content, and I said, oh, that's great. So I attended just sort of a call-out session, and I came away with so many ideas and submitted this unit as one of the ideas, and they wanted to move forward with it. I worked with a UAB professor named Dr. Jeremy Clabo, and then another professor in Illinois named Dr. Jay Bickford, and they really helped me collect primary sources because they had all of these great ideas for using timelines in creative ways that I wouldn't have had on my own. So the bulk of the project, it was an idea born out of what my students wanted and needed, but they enhanced it so much. So I wanted my students to be working on a dual timeline, so understanding Birmingham's history and then also looking at Homewood's history. So looking at the two of them just juxtaposed together. And they gave me some ideas for using timelines, and they said, okay, why don't you present the kids with the events on the timeline, but don't include the years. And the kids will have to use their background knowledge, and they'll have to use context clues, and they'll have to discuss in order to put the events in order. We spent a lot of time building the background knowledge, so we looked at some civil rights events that they were probably already a little bit familiar with. We started with just the primary source packet, and the students had a primary source, and then we would have them look at the sources, and then there would be a prompt with it. So the first one is just, have you ever heard of Rosa Parks? These are Rosa Parks' actual fingerprints. So it's when she was fingerprinted after she was arrested, and then there's a photograph of a bus, and it just says, do you know why Rosa Parks was arrested? So a lot of just kind of open-ended prompts, and my students were instructed to write down whatever they wanted to write down, whatever they noticed. They could answer the questions. I thought it might be too open-ended, and I was worried that they would tell me, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to say, and they didn't. So I feel like they really did build a deep understanding of Rosa Parks and the bus boycott and the March on Washington just through looking at the primary sources. We discussed what had happened. We looked at The Youngest Marcher. We looked at We've Got a Job, these two wonderful books. I loved using this book because, first of all, it's a picture book, so you can use it for a lesson and it's very quick. But it's the story of the girl, Audrey Faye Hendricks, who was literally the youngest marcher. And once my students found out that a child their age was involved, I think they saw the pictures and kind of thought it was more teenagers, but they saw that a child their age, even a little bit younger, ended up marching. They were really, really interested. It was one of my prouder teaching days that I presented them with a very boring graphic organizer and a book that they would normally not be excited for, and every single one of my students was able to read the questions and write a response. When I put it in the context of a topic that they wanted to know more about, I got much better work. I talk a lot in my class about digital literacy and just knowing where your sources come from and what is a trusted source and how do you know that it's a trusted source. So looking at evaluating those sources. So that was already something that I had in place in the classroom. And then we just sort of put it into practice with this project. But the culminating project for this unit was for my students to create a historical marker. And they had to choose either an event to mark or a person or a place from something that we learned about with Homewood history or Birmingham history. So when it was time to create their historical marker, a lot of them did research just on what a historical marker is and what they look like. And then they also had to do some extra research on what they wanted to commemorate with their marker too. So after I kind of modeled it, they put it into practice. I think on day 2, where we started looking at the Children's March, was a huge aha for almost all of my students. When you hear the Children's March, you think, oh, some children marched. But when you read and you see about children being hit with fire hoses, children going to jail, and you are a child, that becomes very real for you. And I do think it's age appropriate, but my students were shocked that kids were hit with fire hoses. And I think that that was the moment that a lot of them said, whoa, wait a minute. And I had them hooked. They needed answers. They needed to know why this happened, and they were just hungry for more. My most reluctant writers and just sort of reluctant students were incredibly engaged. And the way that this activity, because of the open-ended nature, my students who were labeled as gifted, all the way down to my students who attended Tier 3 math, Tier 3 reading, got a lot of interventional support. Everyone was engaged and everyone was able to participate. So everyone had an entry point into this. I think that they get a very curated view of the world, and I wanted them to know what happened here. I wanted them to have the facts, which is why I turned to primary sources. I wanted them to see photographs, newspaper articles. I wanted them to see exactly what was happening and how it was reported, and then to draw their own conclusions from that. I don't want to control the way that my students think. I want them to have critical thinking skills so they can decide what they think. I want them to have the tools to evaluate. I want them to have the tools to critically think. I in no way want to control or sway them, which is why I made this primary source based. I wanted them to see historical documents and then hopefully relate it to today, which I do think that they did. I think when you trust your students enough to show them what happened in an age-appropriate way, that it can create some really magical learning.